Metahuman Martial Arts, The Emperor's Angels, Ultimate Relationships, Princess the Hopeful. These are just some of the few titles that are made by third-party publishers among tabletop role-playing games. Over the years, these games have received a lot of praise as well as a lot of hate because of how they rework the lore and rules of many TTRPGs, from adding modern or even space-age technology to otherwise medieval fantasy games like Pathfinder, to including non-playable factions like the Necrons or Tyranid Genestealers in Warhammer 40,000 roleplay. That said, just what is it about third-party supplements and why do people either like or hate them? Hi, hello, and welcome again everybody to another episode of Natural Juan. This time around we're going to discuss third-party publishers in tabletop role-playing games. Before all that though, if you're enjoying my content so far, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for notifications. Shout out too to Mr. Jonathan Green, my patron in Patreon. If you'd also like to support my channel and what I do here, you'll find my Patreon information in the description below, along with a PayPal account that you can use to make a quick and easy donation. With all that out of the way, let's get started on this video, shall we? First up, let's define just what is a third-party publisher or creator in tabletop RPG terms. A third-party supplement or book is game-related literature written and sold or distributed by an organization that is not part of or associated with the original company that made the game. For those of you unfamiliar with TTRPGs, these games are originally created by a company such as Wizards of the Coast, who made Dungeons & Dragons, Paizo, who brought about Pathfinder and Starfinder, and Games Workshop, the creators and developers of Warhammer 40,000. Then you have what are called house rules or homebrew settings, which are just created by game masters to please their players. This is where the GM or DM talks to his players and agrees to certain rules, such as vampires being immune to sunlight, robots being able to eat material food, and or aliens being able to understand English. A third-party publisher is a company that packages and sells house rules or homebrew settings that adds rules, character options, and new monsters to a given game, such as Sandy Peterson's Call of Cthulhu for Pathfinder or the Emperor's Angels for Warhammer 40,000 roleplay. Next, of course, I'd like to discuss the legal aspect of these games. In many ways, third-party games are a lot like fanfiction for existing materials. For instance, Sandy Peterson's Call of Cthulhu simply adds more elements from the Cthulhu mythos to Pathfinder, while World of Warcraft RPG by Sword and Sorcery Games allow you to emulate playing World of Warcraft online on your tabletop, whether it be Dungeons & Dragons 3.5 or Pathfinder. However, different companies and creators react differently to this, much the same way real-world authors react to people writing fanfiction about their works. For instance, Games Workshop is very critical of any who would profit from their works that is not a part of their company or associates. This level of criticism and possibly even scorn is especially aimed at those trying to create heroic versions of characters, or the much reviled female space marines that are hated by both the company and the fandom. Then you have companies that are somewhat okay with this so long as one does not market or monetize one's work too much, such as Sanguine Games, creator of Ironclaw and Urban Jungle, and are a little more lenient to those who don't use their official intellectual properties, such as the continent of Calabria and the nations and people that can be found in it. Lastly, you have companies that are more open-minded about this, such as Wizards of the Coast with their open game license that allows would-be game creators to make their own games with their own added rules, so long as they don't use official intellectual properties, such as their various settings and specific characters like Driz de Urden, the all-original heroic Dark Elf. Pathfinder by Paizo and Mutants and Masterminds by Green Ronin Publishing are actually derived from the D20 system and capitalized on the open game license by creating their own settings and characters, and also explains why both companies are not just tolerant of, but welcoming of third-party works. Now let's get into the pros and cons of third-party game publishers. One of the major pros of third-party games is the presence of new content. This means that your game will likely have a new setting and story to follow for all your player characters. This can mean them following their medieval fantasy characters, boarding a spaceship and traveling between the stars, or finding themselves in the modern world and trying to fit in. Another huge pro is that of new rules, such as introducing the use of more modern equipment and weapons. For instance, what if your gifted gunslinger character from the Wild West gets his hands on a modern assault rifle? How about your vampire characters finding themselves in outer space where they can be free from being hurt by sunlight? The list goes on. Third and last would be that of new challenges, where your characters might have to face new kinds of threats from even more powerful monsters that could be immune to their own powers, and or environments that severely hamper their already godlike abilities. As for cons of third-party games, let's start with player reception. Let's face it, not all your players will like you introducing new rules to an existing game they like. Some of them might even like it at first, but when the rules start to skew away from their favor, you can bet that there will be backlash. Another thing to face when using third-party materials is bloat. For those unfamiliar with tabletop role-playing games, bloat refers to having too many rules in a game. Tabletop role-playing games are already immensely complicated due to relying on players' imaginations and arithmetic skills. By using third-party materials that are especially heavy on math, this will all but overload your and your players' brains, especially if it changes the way certain rules work, such as combat or social interaction. Third, and most importantly, most third-party materials are largely untested, meaning that unlike official source materials, most of them did not undergo the process of being playtested. This could mean that there can be a lot of unforeseen consequences in-game, such as a player with magic becoming useless in a technology-heavy game, or vice versa. In conclusion, third-party materials and supplements can be a fun way to play, especially if you're already familiar and possibly bored with an existing game. However, it is always a good idea to read and explore it thoroughly to avoid later complications, such as player characters becoming overpowered or underpowered. Last and most important of all would be to consult your players in advance to tell them just what kind of materials you'll be using for your game. This way, your players will be well aware of what kind of game they'll be playing, and might even be able to spot inconsistencies and problems with the rules ahead of time. It can also be a way for you and your gaming group to decide which third-party materials can and should be used and which should not, as it is with everything else. Even official rules released by original companies are often rejected by players and thus not included in actual games. Some third-party supplements I'd like to recommend are Pure Steam by Icosa Entertainment, which introduces a steampunk setting with cowboys and trains for your Pathfinder game. Another would be Metahuman Martial Arts from Misfit Studios, which focuses on improving the combat system of mutants and masterminds, and includes, among other things, body hit locations. Last I'd like to recommend is Princess the Hopeful, an alternate game line for the World or Chronicles of Darkness games that introduces a much less evil but still ruthless faction in the game setting. Also, I'd like you all to know that I've been working on my own third-party supplement with the working title House of Madness, which uses the super-powered system, or the system from Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. It will be following the structure of the first Diablo game, with the classes, more or less, of the second game, but with more silly and less scary plot. In any case, it's still a work in progress, so it won't be coming out soon, but it's already under heavy construction. So that's it for this episode of Natural Juan. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to subscribe to my channel and hit that bell for more content like this. Also, if you'd like to support my channel and what I do here, you can check out my Patreon information below, where you'll also find a PayPal account in case you'd like to make a quick and easy donation. Natural Juan out.